Welcome to the Bnai Brith International podcast. I'm your host, CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for spending some time with us today. Before I introduce today's guest, one quick housekeeping note. Check out our video interview series, Conversations with Bnai Brith, on Facebook and on YouTube. You'll find discussions with everyone from artists to historians to Middle East experts. Watch our latest by subscribing to the Bnai Brith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook at Bnai Brith International. Make sure you check us out. Well, stopping by the podcast today is Bnai Brith's Vice President of Programming, Rhonda Love. We'll be providing updates on Bnai Brith's emergency relief efforts amidst the coronavirus pandemic, the West Coast wildfires, and Gulf Coast hurricanes. Rhonda and I will be speaking about how Bnai Brith is meeting the needs of disaster victims around the world, as well as our ongoing commitment to service. Rhonda, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate being with you, Dan.
Well, let's start really at the beginning, present at the creation. So Bnai Brith was founded in 1843 amidst the number of immigrants that were coming into the United States, largely from Germany and Central Europe. But it wasn't more than 20 years later that Bnai Brith began to take its original mission of volunteerism and move into helping the victims of natural disasters. Tell us about the origins of Bnai Brith's disaster relief efforts.
The history takes us back to what is pre-state Israel in 1865. The Bnai Brith at the time created a fund to support victims of cholera, which had been a huge epidemic at the time. Just a few years later, the first domestic response was in 1868 in response to the Baltimore floods that again, the organization had individuals who were impacted and as well as wanting to be of assistance to the community. And since then, it has been present at what would be, most of the historic disasters in our country and around the world, but certainly within the last few decades, some of the major impact events that we have been able to respond to. It's important to note that Bnai Brith's disaster program doesn't just respond to natural disasters. Unfortunately, it is also needed to respond to man-made disasters. And that, example has really been looking at things like the attack in the Oklahoma City bombing in Oklahoma City, as well as 9/11 and other events recent, such as the Pittsburgh attack of the synagogues just 2 years ago.
Well, before we move into the present, you talked about the history, the outbreak of cholera in pre-state Israel and Baltimore floods. I was attending a meeting of the Southern Jewish Historical Society some years ago and heard a very interesting lecture by Cornelia Wilhelm, the professor that has written a great book about the history of Bnai Brith. And she talked about how Bnai Brith had been very active in helping the victims of the yellow fever outbreaks in Memphis, Tennessee, and in New Orleans, going back to the 1870s. And in fact, if you visit Cincinnati and you go to the American Jewish Archives, they have in the Bnai Brith archive an actual a ledger or a book that was kept by Bnai Brith at that time with all of the details about the assistance that they had given to the victims of these yellow fever outbreaks in the South. So we really do go back a long way in providing assistance to people, not only in our own country, but elsewhere as well. And that's what I want to get into, is the significant events of the Bnai Brith Disaster Relief Fund. You talked about the victims of the Murrah building bombing back in 1995. But let's just talk about now that the last 2 decades. Give us some examples of the kinds of disasters that have occurred and how we've responded.
Sure. I would say that Bnai Brith has been present within those two decades at over 35 to 40 disasters that have happened. Again, not just natural, but also man-made. And the response has really, been involved with volunteers wanting to help, where literally people went and helped clean up disaster area, or provide funding to support projects that were going to be making a difference in this community as at the time of the disaster. And then very importantly for Bnai Brith, at different stages. So one of the things that we really concentrate on are called the unmet needs of a disaster area. And after the headlines and after the emergency people are gone, there is such a need for rebuilding and redevelopment of not just the physical structure, but sometimes the community itself. So we have funded several projects, where that example is known here in the country and also around the world. I would say internationally, Japan is one after major earthquakes. We were able to work in cooperation with another humanitarian group that actually comes out of Israel called IsraAid, and they provided on the ground assistance to the victims of this particular earthquake. They also really dealt with a subject area that we have really also concentrated on funding, which is the need of the psychosocial issues that people find themselves in. And this could be, trauma from having lived through a disaster, as well as, helping those who are helping them. In many cases, the helpers wind up with issues that they need addressed, and our funds have supported programs like that. In Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria, we were able to support, because of donations we received, projects that brought hands-on cleanup through another organization that we have partnered with called Nahama. And they are based in Minnesota, but have helped us coordinate volunteer efforts where we have been able to bring people to get involved and help in recovery. An example of that was just 2 years ago, the senior housing managers of Bnai Brith buildings were meeting in Puerto Rico to assist in the community in coming back together and helping their industry, their hotel industry. But we worked with a program called the World Central Kitchen, and the people who were attending the meeting served as volunteers at a community farm that helped provide produce to the locations around the island that were providing food to people in need, and also to hotels. So it was a great example of being able to help with volunteerism and funds. Another example, and it's probably the largest example of community service, was our efforts after Hurricane Katrina. When we heard the news of what was happening, saw the reports, we were contacted actually by a Bnai Brith leader who knew a doctor who had come to him and said, I need help in being able to take care of the people who have fled to a forest. And they were living in tents and had come without medication, and he needed to be able to provide medication for these people. So asked for assistance. So from a first donation of $10,000 that helped get medical supplies to him, to the last donation that we spent in the area to help rebuild a playground in City Park with the efforts of volunteers from the API fraternity, we were able to bring this amazing amount of funding to so many different projects. It included rebuilding homes with Habitat for Humanity. It included helping musicians recover through a special campaign. It included medical facilities. We had mobile clinics that we had sponsored in cooperation with Catholic Charities and other housing facilities. And a very important point was to help houses of worship. And it was not just synagogues. It was synagogues and churches and other mosques where people literally said to us, please help us help, our community group down the block, help us, but also help them. And it was an amazing time and really important to see the work of the organization doing something.
Well, the list is a long one. I mean, it's the victims of 9/11, the tsunami in Southeast Asia, Katrina, which you just mentioned, earthquakes in Japan, Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. It's a long list. But just curious to ask, because you've been doing this for a long time. There was a time when we didn't have the internet and we'd hear about a hurricane or a tsunami and we could focus on that. But today, given the internet and satellite television and cable television, we are finding out about more and more of these natural disasters almost at the same time. How do you deal with that? How do you prioritize?
We actually have a working committee. Our disaster relief committee will get together, via the phone calls and then a meeting to determine if there's going to be a campaign opened up, and which is really an important point that there is a lot of research that's done, while things are happening to see if there is locations that have Bnai Brith people involved, our own members and supporters who are in this area who we can be helping, as well as when we hear about different locations, a request may come to us where we're able to respond. So it is very hard to pick and choose. And the biggest problem that we have is that because of the internet, you hear so much about what's happening, and then sometimes it just drops off the headlines and, people have moved on to the next subject. So it's difficult to raise money that way when you don't see the need in front of you. So we're very, very cautious about how we open funds and how we respond to funds, because we are grateful for the donations that we receive from our donors and supporters. And very important that we're able to show where every dollar is going to good purpose, and the recipient agencies or locations are able to demonstrate that it is really making a difference in people's lives. You mentioned Oklahoma City. One of the donations that was made was for us to be part of creating the memorial there. And, again, it goes back to, long after, it's out of the headlines, there is a lasting remembrance of these people. And while there is this tangible example there, we also funded scholarships for children whose parents were killed at the time. And, you think back and say how many years it's been, but these kids have grown up, they've gone on to be part of society. It's an amazing impact that, I guess a ripple effect of where a good deed or a kindness comes from by making the donations we do and support we give, to then be able to see, the impact. We sometimes never know until afterwards, that the impact it's had.
Well, speaking of all of that and gathering all this news that comes at one time about a disaster here and a disaster there, we are living right now in a time where we've got some real natural disasters going on. We're watching it. We're here on the East Coast, but we can see what's going on the West Coast. Tell us about what we're doing now in terms of our current focus.
So I want to basically focus on two pieces. One is the current campaign, which is actually a combined campaign. It's to support relief efforts in the Gulf Coast area because they were hit by a double hurricane, and we already have requests for assistance. And the campaign was opened at the time of Hurricane Laura, but is continuing through the remnants of Hurricane Sally and, of course, beyond. At the same time, we see the wildfires in the western states. And the reality there is that it's a massive situation. And again, it will depend upon how much money we're able to raise and what the committee will be able to allocate from some of the existing funds. An example of what we did in another time with the wildfires was in a community where the local needs of service workers, people who were impacted because their industries could not function, we were able to support a local community food bank and help these people with a small donation, but a donation that made a difference. And the same location, there was also a volunteer program that was facilitated with some API chapters who were able to help them clean up around their facility so that they could mitigate, the threat of what future wildfires, which is in a sense keeping, whatever brush is away from the structure. So, again, right now we're in the middle of a campaign, and we also have to be very cognizant of the fact that we're in the middle of COVID. So our COVID response as a campaign started back in March. And that really was because, we saw what was happening around us, but also because we had this frantic call from a Jewish community, our own Bnei Brith leaders and the Jewish community leaders in Italy, where they told us they need supplies, they need help. And with the contacts that Bnei Brith has made throughout the disaster world, but very especially with the Brothers Brother Foundation that's located in Pittsburgh, they receive medical supplies and pharmaceuticals from companies and are able to make them available to organizations such as us as a way to get it to the right places in the right hands. So with a lot of logistics on getting like one of the few flights out, they were able to help us get 27,000 face shields that wound up in Milan, Italy, to help them with prevent exposure, and became really a part of what is a PPE program or project where we're looking to provide additional supplies of masks and sanitizers, as well as addressing the problem of food insecurity because of the economy. And we're supporting a program that is actually in California, that's called the Bagel Brigade, which is a Bnei Brith project, but it helps feed children and families, and literally provides needed food for them for breakfast, for lunches, through the school programs or through shelters. Another project, because of COVID, has been our work as part of a coalition. And we're very happy to be part of a Jewish coalition for disaster relief with other very important organizations. And they're addressing international needs and one that's concentrating on refugees. So some of our allocation will be part of that.
Just to go back to the story with Italy, because it really, I think, is a classic story of when the story of COVID will be told some years from now. You referenced the important connecting of dots between from the request that came in from Bnei Brith in Italy on behalf of, at that point, I think it was the regional government of Lombardy, which Milan is the capital. This need for face guards. At that time, these needs were tremendous all over the world, really. People were scrambling for these kinds of important ways of protecting people. And you had the government of Lombardy, you had the US consulate in Milan, you had the Air Express shipper that was involved in this, and of course, Bnei Brith, led by your efforts here in the United States. And it really was a tremendous gesture, but it shows, we talk about how has the coronavirus pandemic changed the way Bnei Brith responds to disasters? And here, right out of the box, I don't think we were out just but a few weeks when this call came in. And Italy at that point was at the epicenter of the coronavirus in all of Europe. So it's a tremendous story of having to react very quickly, provide the important materials that were needed, and then getting them over to the victims themselves. So it's really something that we're very proud of. Our disaster relief fund, Rhonda, supports also an important project in Latin America with the Bnei Brith Communities in Crisis project. Describe what the group does and how does the project help local communities?
Well, that actually is another project in cooperation with the Brothers Brother Foundation. And in 2002, there was a huge economic disaster in Argentina, and more than double digits, but really a difficult situation. People were finding themselves really in need of being able to eat or have medicine. So the partnership began because Brother's Brother in Pittsburgh and Bnai Brith in Washington and in our connection to these countries were able to make, as you said, connect the dots. These people needed to be able to accept the medicines, make sure that it wound up in the hands of clinics and other health facilities where people were able to get the assistance they needed. And Brother's Brother receives this material from pharmaceuticals who are able to make the donation because in many cases it is maybe near an expiration date, or it is in a situation where a drug has been changed so that it's able to utilize it, for the same reason, but for whatever need it's available. And in fact, one of the things that we're very proud of is that the value of this medicine is millions of dollars. And we're really careful. It's one of the things that you're dealing with, a political structure in a country. We have to make sure the Ministry of Health and the government and all agencies that are involved are doing everything in, proper procedures, because you're dealing with people's lives and you're also dealing with business. So we are very happy, that it's able to continue, even though the situation it addresses is really bad. It is continuing to this day. Some countries have been involved, like Uruguay and Paraguay and Chile, and currently we're still looking at offers. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it's really become difficult to get some of the ministries to be able to focus on being able to deal with the emergency they're dealing with, and at the same time help these programs continue. But it is a wonderful aspect of the disaster relief program because it really saves lives around the world. It's something that's really important. And Brother's Brother has been a partner with us through the tsunami back in 2004. There were container loads of supplies being sent to Sri Lanka and places that needed this so badly, as well as countries that back in Latin America, that it isn't just a disaster that's happened. It's just an ongoing difficult situation.
No, partnering is extremely important. And the case of Brother's Brother, as you mentioned, and with Israel and others. And we haven't really talked about our efforts in Haiti with that terrible combination of hurricane and earthquake that occurred not that long ago, where Bnai Brith was actually on the ground in assisting in that particular effort. And I remember being in Latin America at a time in one of the provinces. I remember that it had some natural disaster, and we had a meeting at that time that was arranged with some of the officials from the Ministry of Health who discussed how that connecting the dots process work of getting the pharmaceuticals that they needed down to Argentina and having then the transfer to the Ministry of Health and getting the medicines to the people who needed them. So really, if we take a look at this, Bnai Brith always strives to help as many people as possible. That's behind the whole idea of helping the victims. What do you think makes our initiatives unique and impactful?
I think a lot of it has to do with our focus on unmet needs. We're not always there when a disaster is happening. We're not there with blankets and water. There are agencies and organizations that do that really well. I think what makes us unique is being able to look at a situation and see where we can be of help. We also have been looking at how volunteers can be involved. It's not easy to be a disaster volunteer. It's a lot of physical work, and at the same time, you want to make sure everybody's safe. So that is another piece of how we connect our funding to projects. We also bring volunteers that can be helpful.
Let's talk about that. This is important because there are opportunities. What's the best way for folks to become involved? And how can people support the needs of victims of natural and man-made disasters through our disaster relief program?
Well, the most important thing is to give. We really need every dollar to be able to make a difference. Somebody once said, well, can I give you a can of, food? And we said, by the time we ship that can of food, it's going to cost us more, to get it where it has to go. So the cost of that can, we could probably do, 10 cans. So dollars are really important. Volunteers are important as well. At this point with COVID, it's not as easy because it's a complicated situation to bring people into an area, travel, etc. So, but we are really hoping on spring of 21 to be able to re-up the opportunity. And we have some projects actually that our partners are awaiting involvement for some of the rebuilding. I mean, frankly, there are disasters that are again gone out of the news, Hurricane Sandy, but there are still the projects that are in need of hands-on effort. And we've been very proudly involved in our young leaders who have been in, the opportunity to help somebody rebuild their home after having it been, destroyed by the floods or the aftermath of what happens when a hurricane or tornadoes go through that.
Well, this tradition of Bnai Brith that, as you've told us, goes back really to the 1860s as part of our mission then of volunteerism and helping those less fortunate, helping those who are victims of these disasters, continues to the present day, and it will continue. And we're very proud of our efforts in being to help folks in need. Rhonda, we very much appreciate your bringing us current on Bnai Brith's emergency relief efforts and for helping turn our mission into action and for your role in it over all of these years. We've been helping those in need since the 1860s, and 2020 is no different. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, if you're looking for a way to partner with us, visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn about our commitment to helping those in need and consider getting involved. Thanks to Bnai Brith's own Rhonda Love for joining me today, and thank you for listening. Now, if you like what you hear, make sure you never miss an episode by tapping the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. For my guest, Rhonda Love, I'm your host, Dan Mariaschin. Talk to you again soon. Take care, everyone.